It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and the park was alive with the sound of laughter and children playing. Amara, a bright 12-year-old with braids that bounced as she ran, and her younger brother Malik, a quiet but curious 9-year-old, had been looking forward to this moment all week. Their father had recently bought them a drone, and today was the perfect day to test it out. "Let's make it go higher," Malik said excitedly, watching the small drone buzz above the trees like a mechanical bird. Amara skillfully controlled it, guiding the drone to do loops and dives, while Malik clapped his hands in delight. Nearby, families picnicked under the shade of tall oaks, and joggers passed by with smiles. It seemed like a perfect day, until the mood shifted. 2 police officers, both wearing crisp blue uniforms, entered the park. They scanned the area and quickly noticed Amara and Malik with the drone. Whispering to each other, they walked briskly toward the siblings. Amara didn't notice them at first, but Malik's eyes widened. "Amara," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "The police are coming over here." Amara turned, her hand still on the drone's controller, and saw the 2 officers approaching. Their expressions were serious, and it made her stomach twist. She wasn't sure why they were coming, but she held her ground. "Hey, kids," one of the officers said, his tone sharp. "Where did you get that drone?" Amara blinked, unsure how to respond. "It's ours," she said hesitantly. "Our dad bought it for us." The officer frowned. "Do you have proof of that?" he asked, folding his arms. "It looks expensive. How do I know you didn't take it from someone?" Amara's hands trembled slightly, but she tightened her grip on the controller. "We didn't take it," she said firmly. "It's ours." The second officer stepped closer. "What's in your backpack?" he asked, pointing at Malik, who was clutching his small bag tightly. "We need to check it." Malik's face turned pale, and he shook his head. "It's just my water bottle and snacks," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "Hand it over," the officer demanded. Amara stepped in front of her brother, her heart pounding. "Why do you need to search it?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "We haven't done anything wrong." The officer sighed, clearly impatient. "We're investigating some recent thefts in the area. Just let us check your bag, and we'll see if everything's fine." A small crowd began to gather, sensing the tension. A woman nearby whispered to her friend, "Those kids don't look like troublemakers. What's going on?" Malik clutched Amara's hand, his small fingers trembling. "Amara, what do we do?" he asked in a shaky voice. Amara took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She remembered her father's advice. "If something doesn't feel right, call me immediately." She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and quickly dialed her dad's number. The officers noticed and frowned. "What are you doing?" one of them asked. "I'm calling my dad," Amara said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "He'll explain everything." On the other end of the line, their father, Mr. Adeyemi, answered immediately. "Amara, is everything okay?" Amara's voice cracked as she explained the situation. "The police are here, Dad. They think we stole the drone. They're asking to search Malik's bag." Mr. Adeyemi's tone turned serious but calm. "Stay where you are. Don't let them take anything from you. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The officers looked uncomfortable as Amara continued holding the phone. "We're just doing our job," one muttered, but the murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Amara stood tall, her fear slowly replaced by determination. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but she trusted her dad. For now, all she had to do was hold on. Amara kept her grip tight on the drone controller, her phone pressed firmly against her ear. The sound of her father's calm yet serious voice gave her a sliver of hope in a moment that felt overwhelming. Malik stood close to her, his wide eyes darting between the officers and the growing crowd. "Put the phone down, young lady," one of the officers said, though his tone was less confident now. "We're just asking some questions." "I already told you," Amara replied, her voice steady. "Our dad is coming." He'll explain everything." The officer sighed heavily, glancing at his partner. The crowd of onlookers was becoming more vocal, murmuring about what they were seeing. A woman nearby pulled out her phone and began recording, while another muttered, "Those kids don't look like they're up to anything wrong. What's this about?" Meanwhile, in his office downtown, Mr. Adeyemi quickly grabbed his keys and left in a rush. As a diplomat, he was no stranger to handling tense situations, but the thought of his children being treated unfairly filled him with a quiet fury. His job had taught him to remain calm under pressure, and he knew this would be no different. He had to stay composed for Amara and Malik. On the drive to the park, Mr. Adeyemi replayed Amara's words in his head. "They think we stole the drone." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. He knew the importance of addressing the situation carefully, not just for his children, but for the example it would set for the community. Back at the park, Amara could feel the tension growing. The officers had stopped pressing them for now, perhaps realizing that the crowd was not on their side. Malik whispered to his sister, "Do you think Dad will be mad?" Amara shook her head. "No, Malik. He's not mad at us. He's coming to help." A man in the crowd stepped forward cautiously. "Officers," he said, his tone polite but firm, "maybe you should wait until their father gets here. It seems like these kids are just playing." One of the officers frowned but didn't reply. The other officer shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to being questioned, and the situation was clearly slipping out of their control. Within minutes, Mr. Adeyemi's car pulled up near the park entrance. He stepped out, his tall figure and sharp suit commanding attention. As he walked toward the scene, the crowd parted slightly, making way for him. His expression was calm but resolute, his presence radiating authority. "Dad," Amara called out, relief washing over her face. Malik let out a small sigh and ran to his father, hugging him tightly. Mr. Adeyemi placed a protective hand on Malik's shoulder and looked directly at the officers. "What is going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. One of the officers cleared his throat. "We received reports of thefts in the area, sir. We noticed the drone and thought." Mr. Adeyemi held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "You thought my children were thieves?" he asked, his tone sharp now. "Did you ask them any meaningful questions before assuming guilt? Did you consider the impact this would have on them?" The officer stammered, "We were just trying to do our job, sir." "Your job," Mr. Adeyemi said, his voice steady but cutting, "is to protect and serve, not to terrify innocent children based on baseless assumptions." The crowd nodded in agreement, their murmurs growing louder. A few people even clapped. The woman filming the incident moved closer, capturing every word. "Check the serial number on the drone," Mr. Adeyemi continued, pulling out his phone. "I have the receipt right here. This drone was purchased legally, and you'll find no evidence to suggest otherwise." The officers exchanged nervous glances. One of them reluctantly took down the serial number and confirmed it matched the purchase receipt. The tension in the air began to shift. "Now," Mr. Adeyemi said, his tone still firm, "I'd like to hear an apology to my children." The officers looked uncomfortable, but the growing pressure from the crowd left them no choice. "We're sorry," one of them muttered. "We shouldn't have jumped to conclusions." Mr. Adeyemi nodded, but his expression remained serious. "We'll talk more about this," he said. "This isn't just about my children. It's about how you approach your duty as officers of the law." As the officers stepped back, the crowd erupted in cheers, applauding Mr. Adeyemi's composure and the way he stood up for his children. With the officers retreating, the atmosphere in the park began to shift. The tension that had gripped everyone moments ago started to ease. Amara and Malik stood beside their father, feeling a wave of relief, but the confusion and fear they had experienced lingered in their young eyes. The crowd, though dispersing slowly, remained curious about how this situation would unfold. Mr. Adeyemi knelt down to Malik's level, his voice gentle but firm. "Are you all right, son?" he asked, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Malik nodded hesitantly. "I was scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't believe us." Amara, standing beside them, added, "I told them it was our drone, but they wouldn't listen. They just wanted to search Malik's bag." Mr. Adeyemi's heart ached hearing this. His children had been made to feel powerless, and he knew that no child should have to endure such an experience. He stood up, his calm demeanor masking the fire of determination within him. The officers, who had taken a few steps back, exchanged nervous glances. Mr. Adeyemi approached them, his tall figure commanding respect without a hint of aggression. "Officers," he began, his tone measured, "we need to have a conversation. Not just about what happened here today, but about what this represents." The older officer, clearly uncomfortable, replied, "Sir, we've already apologized. We didn't mean to upset anyone." Mr. Adeyemi nodded but didn't let the comment slide. "An apology is a good start," he said, "but it doesn't undo the fear you caused my children. You assumed guilt before even asking basic questions. Why is that?" The younger officer hesitated before responding. "We received reports of thefts in the area," he said. "We were just trying to follow up." "And in doing so," Mr. Adeyemi replied, "you singled out 2 children who were simply playing in a park. Did you stop to think about the message that sends? To them, to this community." The crowd, now smaller but still present, murmured in agreement. One woman called out, "He's right. You need to do better." Another man stepped forward, addressing the officers. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened here," he said. "You can't just go around accusing people without evidence." The older officer sighed, clearly feeling the weight of the criticism. "You're right," he admitted. "We could have handled this differently." Mr. Adeyemi seized the moment. "Handling it differently starts with accountability," he said. "It also requires training, understanding, and a willingness to listen. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen again, to my children or anyone else." The younger officer looked down, his expression thoughtful. "What do you suggest we do?" he asked, his tone more genuine now. Mr. Adeyemi's posture softened slightly. "Start by coming to the community," he said. "Meet the people you're supposed to protect. Understand their lives, their struggles, and their strengths. Fear comes from ignorance, and trust is built through connection." The officers exchanged glances, and the older one finally nodded. "We'll take that to heart," he said. "And again, we're sorry for what happened today." Mr. Adeyemi turned to his children, his expression warm but serious. "Amara, Malik," he said, "you did nothing wrong. I want you to remember that. Always stand up for yourselves and speak the truth, no matter how difficult it might seem." Amara nodded, her confidence returning. "We will, Dad," she said, her voice steady. Malik looked up at his father, his small hand gripping Mr. Adeyemi's tightly. "Thanks for coming so fast," he said. "I knew you'd help us." As they prepared to leave, a few members of the crowd approached Mr. Adeyemi, thanking him for his words and his calm handling of the situation. One woman, still holding her phone, said, "I recorded everything. I think people need to see this, not to shame the officers, but to learn from it." Mr. Adeyemi nodded. "If it can spark change, then let it be shared," he said. As they walked back to their car, Amara and Malik felt a renewed sense of safety by their father's side. For Mr. Adeyemi, the day was far from over. He knew this was just the beginning of a larger conversation, one he was determined to lead. The drive home was quiet, with only the sound of the car's engine filling the air. Amara stared out the window, her mind replaying the events at the park. Malik, sitting in the back seat, clutched his drone tightly, as if letting it go would make the day feel even worse. "Dad," Amara finally said, breaking the silence, "why did they think we stole the drone? We didn't do anything wrong." Mr. Adeyemi glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his heart heavy. "Sometimes people let fear or assumptions guide their actions," he said gently. It's not fair, and it's not right. That's why it's important to speak up, like you did today. But I was so scared, Amara admitted, her voice trembling. What if you hadn't come? Mr. Adeyemi pulled the car over and turned to face his children. Listen to me, both of you, he said, his tone firm but loving. You were brave today. You stood your ground and called for help when you needed it. That takes courage. And no matter what, I will always be there for you. Malik looked up, his eyes wide. Will they ever bother us again? He asked softly. Mr. Adeyemi shook his head. I'm going to make sure they don't, and not just for you, but for every child in this community. The next morning, Mr. Adeyemi began his day with purpose. After dropping Amara and Malik off at school, he headed straight to the local police station. He had already scheduled a meeting with the precinct's captain to discuss what had happened. The captain, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, greeted Mr. Adeyemi in his office. I heard about the incident, he said, gesturing for Mr. Adeyemi to sit. I want to apologize on behalf of the department. This shouldn't have happened. Mr. Adeyemi nodded but didn't let the apology end the conversation. I appreciate your words, he said, but apologies aren't enough. My children were terrified. The officers involved need to understand the impact of their actions, and the department needs to take steps to ensure this doesn't happen again. The captain leaned forward, listening carefully. What do you propose? He asked. Mr. Adeyemi outlined a plan. First, there needs to be more training for your officers. Training that focuses on understanding diverse communities and avoiding assumptions. Second, I suggest setting up community events where officers can meet residents in a positive environment. Building trust starts with connection. The captain nodded thoughtfully. Those are good ideas, he said. We've been meaning to strengthen our relationship with the community, and this could be the right step forward. And lastly, Mr. Adeyemi added, I want to involve the community in these efforts. People need to feel heard and valued. This isn't just about fixing what went wrong. It's about creating a better future. The captain agreed, promising to implement the suggestions and follow up with Mr. Adeyemi regularly. We'll also speak directly with the officers involved, he said. They need to take responsibility and learn from this. Later that afternoon, Amara and Malik came home from school to find their father waiting for them at the kitchen table. He smiled warmly as they set their backpacks down. I had a meeting with the police captain today, he said. We talked about what happened, and he's going to make changes. You two have helped start something important. Amara's eyes widened. Really? She asked. Yes, Mr. Adeyemi replied. Because of what you went through, other kids might not have to face the same thing. That's something to be proud of. Malik, still holding his drone, asked quietly, Does that mean we helped? Mr. Adeyemi nodded. You both did more than you realize. That evening, as they sat together for dinner, the family felt a renewed sense of hope. The fear of the previous day hadn't disappeared, but it had been transformed into something stronger, a determination to make things better, not just for themselves but for their entire community. As the sun set, Amara and Malik played with their drone in the backyard, laughter filling the air. And for the first time since the incident, they felt truly safe again. The next morning, news of the incident at the park had already started to spread. Videos recorded by onlookers began circulating on social media, sparking conversations about fairness, accountability, and trust between the police and the community. Amara and Malik's story became a rallying point for neighbors who wanted to see change. At Carter Elementary, where Amara and Malik went to school, teachers and students alike spoke about the courage the siblings had shown. Amara's best friend, Jenna, ran up to her during recess. I saw the video, she said, her eyes wide. You were so brave, Amara. I don't think I could have done what you did. Amara smiled shyly. I was scared, she admitted, but I just kept thinking about what my dad always says. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Malik, playing nearby, overheard the conversation and puffed out his chest proudly. "Our dad's the best," he said. "He came and made everything better." Meanwhile, Mr. Adeyemi was busy organizing a community meeting. He had spoken with the police captain again that morning and proposed holding an open forum where residents could share their concerns and ideas directly with the officers. The captain agreed, and they planned the event for that weekend at the local community center. Flyers were distributed throughout the neighborhood, and word spread quickly. By the time Saturday arrived, the center was packed with families, young and old, eager to participate. Amara and Malik sat in the front row with their father, feeling both nervous and excited. This was the first time they had ever attended something like this. The event began with the police captain addressing the crowd. "We're here today to listen," he said, his tone sincere. "We want to hear your experiences, your concerns, and your suggestions. We know we have work to do, and we're committed to doing it." Mr. Adeyemi was the first to speak. Standing tall, he recounted the events at the park, ensuring his words remained calm and constructive. "This isn't about pointing fingers," he said. "It's about finding solutions. We need to rebuild trust, and that starts with acknowledging what went wrong and taking steps to do better." The audience applauded, and one by one, others stood up to share their stories. Some spoke of similar experiences, while others shared ideas for improving relationships between law enforcement and the community. Suggestions included holding more events like this, creating youth programs led by officers, and implementing cultural sensitivity training. Amara surprised everyone when she raised her hand to speak. Mr. Adeyemi smiled encouragingly as she stood up. "I just want to say thank you to everyone who came today," she began, her voice steady. "What happened at the park was really scary, but it's nice to see so many people who care about making things better. I hope we can all work together so kids like me and my brother don't have to feel scared anymore." The room erupted in applause, and Malik, inspired by his sister, stood up as well. "Yeah," he added, his voice small but determined. "And maybe the police can play with us sometimes too." The crowd chuckled warmly at Malik's suggestion, and even the officers smiled. It was a light-hearted moment that broke some of the lingering tension in the room. As the meeting concluded, the captain announced plans for several new initiatives, including monthly community police meetups and workshops for officers to better understand the people they served. "This is just the beginning," he said, "but it's a step in the right direction." Outside the community center, families lingered to talk and connect. Amara and Malik were approached by neighbors who praised their courage and kindness. "You've made a difference," one woman said, kneeling to their level. "You've shown us all what it means to stand up for what's right." That evening, as the family walked home, Amara looked up at her father. "Do you think things will really change?" she asked. Mr. Adeyemi nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Change takes time," he said. "But with people like you and Malik leading the way, I believe it's possible." Malik grinned. "We're like superheroes, right, Dad?" Mr. Adeyemi laughed, pulling them both close. "The best kind," he said. "The ones who inspire others to be better." The days following the community meeting were filled with a renewed sense of hope. Conversations about change and fairness echoed across the neighborhood. Families spoke about how they could come together to support one another, and officers began showing more effort in connecting with the people they served. For Amara and Malik, life slowly started to feel normal again. At school, Amara worked on an essay about courage, inspired by what had happened at the park. Malik, meanwhile, carried his drone everywhere, his confidence slowly returning. They both knew their family's experience had sparked something bigger than just their story. One afternoon, while Malik flew his drone in the backyard, Amara joined her father in the kitchen. "Dad," she said, watching him stir a pot of soup, "do you think the police really meant what they said at the meeting?" Mr. Adeyemi looked up and smiled. "I believe some of them did," he replied. "But change doesn't happen overnight. That's why we need to keep working, talking, and making sure they follow through." Amara nodded thoughtfully. What else can we do to help?" Mr. Adeyemi set down his spoon and turned to her. "You're already helping by speaking up and sharing your story," he said. "But if you want to do more, maybe you can think about how to bring kids and officers together. Sometimes, the best way to build trust is to find common ground." Inspired by her father's words, Amara began brainstorming ideas. She talked with her friends at school, asking what they thought would make kids feel safer around the police. Jenna suggested a game day where kids and officers could play sports together. Another classmate, Liam, suggested a reading program where officers could read books with younger students. Amara loved the ideas and shared them with her father, who helped her present them to the police captain. To her surprise, the captain enthusiastically supported the plans. "This is exactly what we need," he said. "Let's make it happen." The first event was held at the park where everything had started. Officers set up a soccer field, brought board games, and even grilled hot dogs for everyone. Families poured in, bringing picnic blankets and excited kids. Amara and Malik arrived early with their father, ready to help out. As the event began, Amara noticed something interesting. The officers, who had seemed so intimidating before, were laughing and playing alongside the kids. One officer showed a group of children how to kick a soccer ball properly, while another joined a game of tag. Malik, with his drone in hand, demonstrated tricks to a curious officer, who clapped and cheered him on. Mr. Adeyemi watched the scene with pride. He had always believed in the power of community, but seeing it come to life was something special. He approached the police captain, who was helping serve food to a long line of kids. "Thank you for supporting this," Mr. Adeyemi said, shaking his hand. The captain smiled. "No, thank you," he replied. "You reminded us why we do what we do. It's not just about enforcing rules. It's about building trust and making people feel safe." As the day went on, Amara and Malik found themselves surrounded by new friends. Malik even taught one of the officers how to control the drone, laughing when the officer struggled to keep it steady. By the end of the event, the atmosphere was filled with warmth and laughter. Amara stood with her father, watching families pack up and head home. "Dad," she said, "do you think this will really make a difference?" Mr. Adeyemi placed a hand on her shoulder. "It already has," he said. "Today, we proved that change is possible when people come together." That night, as the family sat around the dinner table, Malik couldn't stop talking about the day's events. "The officer said I was a great teacher," he exclaimed, beaming. Amara smiled. "And you were," she said. "Today felt different, like things are really getting better." Mr. Adeyemi nodded. "It's just the beginning," he said. "But it's a good start, and I couldn't be prouder of both of you." As they finished their meal, the family felt a renewed sense of hope. They knew the journey wasn't over, but they were ready to face it together, one step at a time. The week after the event at the park, the entire neighborhood felt different. Conversations about fairness, understanding, and community echoed in homes, schools, and even in the local grocery store. The small event had created a ripple effect, showing that change was possible when people came together. Amara walked home from school with Malik, her backpack slung over her shoulder, and her mind buzzing with ideas. "Malik," she said, turning to her brother, "do you think we can do something like that park event again? Maybe even bigger?" Malik, holding the drone carefully in his hands, nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, but this time, we can have more games and maybe even a drone race." Amara laughed. "I like that idea. Let's tell Dad." When they arrived home, Mr. Adeyemi was sitting at the dining table, reading over some papers. He looked up and smiled as the kids burst into the room. "How was school?" he asked. "Great," Amara said, pulling out a chair to sit beside him. "But we were thinking, what if we planned another event, like the one at the park, but even bigger?" Mr. Adeyemi raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, and what do you have in mind?" Amara leaned forward excitedly. "We could do a community festival. There could be games, food, music, and maybe even workshops where kids can learn new things. And the police can join again so people can keep getting to know them better. Malik chimed in, and a drone race. We have to have a drone race. Mr. Adeyemi chuckled. I think that's a wonderful idea, he said. Let's start planning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Amara and Malik worked closely with their father to organize the festival, reaching out to neighbors, schools, and local businesses for support. The police captain even offered resources from the department, including volunteers to help set up and run activities. As the date of the festival approached, excitement buzzed through the neighborhood. Flyers were handed out, social media posts were shared, and families marked their calendars. Everyone was looking forward to the day. Finally, the day of the festival arrived. The park was transformed with colorful banners, tables filled with food, and activity booths lining the grassy field. Children ran around, their laughter filling the air, while parents mingled and caught up with neighbors. The atmosphere was electric with joy and hope. Amara and Malik had set up a special booth for the drone race, with Malik acting as the expert in teaching kids how to fly. Officers joined in, and the sight of kids and police laughing together was a powerful image that stayed with everyone who saw it. In the afternoon, Mr. Adeyemi took the stage to thank everyone for coming. Today, he said, his voice steady and warm, is proof of what we can accomplish when we come together. It's not about ignoring the past. It's about learning from it and building a future where everyone feels safe, valued, and heard. The crowd erupted into applause, and Amara and Malik beamed with pride. They knew their father's words were true, and they felt honored to be part of something so meaningful. As the festival wound down, Amara sat on the grass with her father and brother, watching the sun set over the park. Malik was holding his drone, a wide smile on his face. This was the best day ever, he said. Amara nodded in agreement. I think we really made a difference, she said. Not just for us, but for everyone. Mr. Adeyemi placed an arm around both of his children. You did, he said. You reminded this community, and even the police, what it means to work together. I couldn't be prouder of you both. That night, as they walked home under the glow of the streetlights, Amara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The fear she had felt that day at the park was a distant memory, replaced by strength, courage, and hope. She knew there was still work to be done, but she also knew they were on the right path. Malik looked up at her and grinned. Do you think we're superheroes now, Amara? Amara laughed, squeezing his hand. Maybe not superheroes, she said, but we're definitely something special. Mr. Adeyemi smiled at his children, feeling a sense of pride that words couldn't express. Together, they had faced a challenge and turned it into an opportunity for growth and unity. And as they reached their home, they knew this was just the beginning of a brighter future for their community.